Thank you so much for the invite to be here today. It's a pleasure. I, of course, have heard a lot from Jonas about the school and the activities over here, but it's great actually to be here. Yeah, so my name is Ted Schaumann. I'm from Finland, based in Helsinki, and we run an architecture and urban planning practice together with Jonas. And Jonas, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, and I'm Swedish, living in Malmö, but working in Copenhagen. And just a little bit of background story. We studied together and then also worked at an office in Copenhagen called Kobe, and then we founded our office. So,
great. I think in our speech we're going to be hopefully within the team, but also all over the place. Starting with a short intro about ourselves and the office, some thoughts on the city, living in environments in proximity to water, and then through some examples of what we've been doing in our practice, we will touch these different themes. So yeah, as we mentioned, we are basically a Nordic studio, focusing on Denmark and Finland, obviously, but especially the Baltics and the Nordic countries. And today we are 9 persons in the office. Relatively small, but since the beginning we've have this ambition to work in all scales of architecture and urban planning. It's of course very easy to say that we can do everything, but we strongly believe that we learn a lot from doing different things, and therefore it's also possible in the long run. So we work with really big scale strategic planning, building architecture, urban spaces, all the way down to design and smaller spaces. In addition to that, of course, teaching and research is part of the DNA. And as an ambition also, we don't just want to design buildings or urban plans. We aim to create sustainable environments and communities, and it's often done through interaction and inclusive processes.
yeah, and then a lot of these things have actually already been touched today by previous speakers, but here are some of our thoughts of the city that we of course work with in our daily practice. So that like the city, not going in on details how the city has been developed, but it's always been under the influence of different stakeholders, sometimes monetary or political, and the further we come to our time, more and more influenced by the general public. So we always talk about in the office and also in the studio that what is the influence of an architect and what is the role of an architect, and how do we develop that as professions and also together with other stakeholders and disciplines within the praxis of urban planning and development. So like the idea of the city and the quality of the city is of course that you get proximity to a lot of qualities, like education, trade, infrastructure. Historically that has been one of the reasons and protection why you moved to a city. And then you had kind of the exodus from the city, to simplify this a bit, like after the Second World War with the introduction of the private mobility with cars and the kind of request or a need, the desire for a private home. And then you could say that since the early 90s or early 2000, the city has become much more attractive again. And you can see that in multiple cities like Copenhagen and here in Milan and Malmö, that a lot of structures have been starting to be reused and made more attractive again. And then you have the shift of which we experienced during COVID and also a little bit before, but that the cities are becoming kind of deserts to some extent, that you don't always use the normal facilities in the city for shopping or for meeting or these things as warehouses kind of consume the regular department stores, and you start to have meeting more and more on the web. And then we are kind of in this time today now. A lot of the previous presenters have also touched this. Like, how can we actually start to look at our cities as mines above ground? Use the resources that we have, not only the structures as buildings, but the urban spaces, and really trying to identify a lot of potential that is kind of lying there latent, sometimes passive, sometimes it's a bottom-up kind of activity that exists there, but how can we kind of refine that without together, without it losing its authenticity? So, like, this is an example from Copenhagen, where it was a waterfront area called Islands Brygge, which was a polluted area where people was protesting and being very angry about all the pollution and the industries that were destroying the cities. And now today, this is one of the most kind of during summertime used areas. And of course, this transformation took some years, but with political ambition and a kind of strong grassroots and public presence, this was transformed. And then I think that this is, we think that this is a very interesting topic in relation to Riga and to the Daugava River, the Sunda Canal, and the area where we are. Like, how can the waterfront become more attractive? And when we start to work with these environments, there is this paradox that when you build close to water, you're also challenging all the non-human kind of species. So there is like a paradox of kind of discussing the attractivity and the vulnerability of how this can be something that kind of because when us humans have a huge impact on the environment of the other species, and this is an example from Malmö and from south of Sweden, both of them. So one is a protected area where there is like animals breeding, and the other one is where people might be breeding if they meet the right one. Yeah. Anyway, and this is like another example of a waterfront. One, both actually made by man, but one with a focus on creating new habitats, or a more kind of diverse habitat for animals. It's in Mariehamn on Åland, between Finland and Sweden, and the other one is a kind of a waterfront, typical kind of waterfront urban development where there is not so much space for water life of non-humans. And then so I mean, there is this conflict between the kind of natural environment, but also the potential of where architecture and planning can become a mediator, not necessarily always the solution, but it could become like a mediator between the kind of natural environment, if we can call it that, and the built environment, if we are really listening into what is there today.
Then, if we dig a bit deeper into these themes about developments in coastal areas, there's of course a lot of different scales also within this. So from the really large scale developments of new cities along shorelines, all the way down to the really small ones, maybe in untouched natural areas. And the questions, at least in our work, when throughout our careers, we have been working with all these, and there's different types of questions that we ask ourselves. So when you talk about the really big scales, it's maybe the questions are more like, okay, what premises should the cities expand on coastal areas? What's the relationship to nature and biodiversity? How do we prepare for raising sea levels? And the key themes are more about what is a city and how should it be conceived in the 21st century. Then maybe the more typical one is like there's new neighborhoods being developed in connection to existing cities. The questions are slightly different. It's more about system thinking. how will the new district be connected to existing infrastructure and urban structure? How can it be developed in connection to the existing biodiversity? What's the identities the new city district will be based on? And it's more about mobility, long-term vision, urban structure, green, blue structure, and flexibility. And then going down to like renewal of existing waterfronts. Here it's about understanding the location, what existing qualities are there, what are the exact challenges on an urban scale, how do we tackle those, and what's the balance between creating new and leaving it as it is. So understanding what there is and identifying the specific problems. And then the really small scale interventions in coastal areas might be about cabins or singular houses, but also there are important questions to ask when starting a project or a design. And here it's more about in what way do we place the building is very on a micro scale, micro location and precision and place. And we thought that we could take some from our office work or studios work, we take some examples of these different themes and scales. So this is a project that we were commissioned to do together with the city of Turku, which is on the southwestern coast of Finland. And it looks approximately like this. It's an old city from the 13th century that has been developed along the river of Aura. And throughout the history, the historical city center has been around the river. And then now the densification, typical densification of the city has been done along the kind of industrial, the red colored here, industrial areas that have been outside the city center. And now the city asked us to think about how could the city grow in the next 50 or 100 years. And the starting point was that the green area here that's where the industrial harbor is today. So it occupies a long stretch of the shoreline which is south facing, and it's actually the place that is closest to this fantastic archipelago that you see outside. So the idea was that if we could move this industrial harbor in the future, there's a political decision that hasn't been done, but the idea, the city planning director asked us that, okay, maybe if we can show on what principles and how it could be done, then maybe there's a kind of base for discussion on a political level. And as you can see from these pictures, these are all from this area. It's mostly asphalt and typical industrial functions, but actually and additionally, of course, the infrastructure and everything has been built according to those premises. And what it has led to that there are also these neighborhoods in the city that are located very much in the area, but they have become this kind of disconnected, inward-looking islands because they are separated by these big infrastructural veins, and they don't have a connection to the very attractive shoreline and the landscape around it because everything is blocked out. So the kind of starting point was, okay, the city center in the future we could develop, then continue to grow the city towards this area rather than expanding it in all directions. So it's a very natural direction to grow. And it has this kind of very long, attractive south-facing shoreline, quite diverse and undulating, connected to the archipelago. And there are already an existing kind of natural qualities and a framework for a kind of potential development to grow on. And it could also help these kind of neighborhoods that exist to reconnect to the shoreline. And so in the end, I mean, it was a long process, but the vision kind of went from an industrial barrier that separates land and sea to an accessible, diverse, and inviting city district connected to the sea. So these kind of barriers would be transformed into communities. And of course, this is easier said than done, but it was kind of a good starting point. And in the process, I'm not going to go through these very precisely. These are quite generic 5 core themes that were investigated in the project. And in the end, it kind of still, even though this is a future vision, it ended up in a quite typical way of communicating it, that it still looks like a city and it's not completely conceptual. So this is the current situation here, the entire industrial harbor. And this is what it kind of, the vision plan, so to say, ended up in. And just very quickly about, without going into the analysis, but it kind of consists of 10 different neighborhoods within this entire area. Each one of them have their own identity. And the city is actually building a tram network today, and the second phase is planned to reach westwards along this main infrastructural boulevard. So that would be kind of the main mobility system that would connect this to the existing city center. And in addition to that, the city is also planning this kind of super bus connection that would supplement this kind of mobility corridor. And what's of course nice that this being by the sea, there's also a big potential to add like a public water bus system that already exists in the city, but kind of growing it westwards would create quite a unique way of moving around in the city of Turku in the future. And here's the kind of the green network that is identified, and the idea on broad terms was to reconnect these green corridors to the shoreline, and they would of course then create very specific places in the urban fabric of this part of the city. And then of course this entire shoreline, how in the future if they start developing this scheme, how do you make sure that this shoreline becomes both attractive and accessible, but also diverse in terms of biodiversity? Where do you build and where do you leave it untouched, and where do you restore nature? And then these neighborhoods have their specific identities based on what there already is, both the physical but also the kind of natural location. And then in the project, we went through some of these neighborhoods and looked at, for example, the Shipbuilders Beach, which is an area furthest west, which has a history of shipbuilding. So maybe that identity could be taken forward in the future development. Or the silo park blocks, where there's these old oil silos that could be part of creating or establishing the new identity.
And just mentioning one thing also is that all the areas that were north of this area will get access via these urban corridors and green connections down to the waterfront. And I mean, the previous project has a time horizon of around 2100, where we all will be dead, most likely. Maybe some of you younger guys will be alive. But this other one, that was actually the first project that we started up with, is supposed to be finished around 2050. And this project is in Tampere, in Finland also. And it's a new district, city district, that where you can see the central district here, Tampere city center, and then Järvenranta, which is just adjacent to the city center. So it's a quite extensive district. With 19,000 new residents and 5,500 new job opportunities. And it's a project we did together, just short, together with another firm called Mandaworks, a one competition, open competition. And when we started to work with this before, I mean, in the early stages of the competition, you had some obvious qualities that we wanted to emphasize. Even though it's a really big project, it's nice to start with something specific that you can kind of circulate around. And that was the proximity to the lake, of course, the post-industrial environment, all these structures that are there, and then the heritage buildings from the previous owners of the factories, the manor houses and the chapels and these things, to kind of integrate that as in the big urban development. So our vision was to kind of go from this recently closed industry to using the heritage as a catalyst for sustainable urban development, and then to kind of use that those qualities that were there to fuel it with rich public life. And these were the goals that were developed actually a lot during the process after also winning the competition. So it's like a city of the future, a platform for new ideas, versatile and rich experiences, an attractive future business environment for new businesses and existing businesses in the area, and then urban green city by the lake. So since it's such a big project and there's a lot of consultants and public discussions, it needs to be kind of clear in the overall structure to be able to kind of everybody is joining interests and agreeing on things. So these four strategies were from the winning competition, but then adapted throughout the processes. Basically that you have a diverse and flexible urban structure that grows from the existing infrastructure that is on the site, and then using the green and blue qualities to kind of organize the urban structure, and continuing to identify these sub-areas for the planning. And then also, since there was a big investment in infrastructure, also using that as a corridor for hotspots in the urban fabric. So the first kind of organizing element was the kind of an idea of a structure which could be adapted and used as a planning tool. So here you have these three districts. It's a mixed business district. It's kind of the heritage area where the main buildings that are there today are situated, and then the lake city, which is half based on landfill and half based on current coastline. And then the blue and green structure that kind of ties the whole plan together. The urban mobility, both kind of for pedestrian traffic, soft traffic in general, and then for the tram line and bus lines, and also for car traffic with parking hubs. So also the idea of having this as an environment that gives back, both to the people living there, of course, but also to the community. Because since it's an old industrial site, there are some areas that are polluted, so really trying to take care of that when developing it. This is Patrick Verhoeven from Mandaworks in one of the design sessions when we were having user participation dialogue sessions on site with different stakeholders, from like politicians to local community. And this is the competition entry that we won with in 2017. And this has then, of course, been developed throughout the process. I'm not going to go in depth why all this development happened like it did, but this is because of all different stakeholders involved in an urban planning development. And then in the end, this was the final master plan that was approved 2022, I guess. Yeah. And then this is the final master plan. And what's interesting with this is that it has to do a lot with the kind of things that you didn't know in the competition that kind of was influencing the plan. This is the status of 2023. And here is some images from the user participation dialogues and meetings.
Yeah, well, I could actually add there. It's also, I mean, big and long process, but it's interesting also what the city of Tampere has done here, that even before anything has been built, they opened up these old industrial facilities for temporary uses, and different organizations and grassroots level companies and groups to kind of try to see where and what kind of identity it could grow into, and then that would influence, of course, the next phases of the planning of these areas. And of course, this was a master plan, and now the city is kind of developing different sub areas with the tools that were created in the master planning phase. Okay, jumping down in scale, this is also a coastal development in Helsinki this time. And it's basically a housing block on the eastern shores of the Helsinki city center, in an area which is being developed from an industrial harbor into a kind of diverse urban neighborhood. And that's the plot that we are working on at the moment, shown in red. And as you can see here, it's kind of part of this quite big development, and it's going to be the kind of peninsula that sticks out. And the interesting part of this is that this is a very commercial project, that it's a big private investor or developer with an institutional investor, and there was a fixed zoning plan, as you can see here on the map. This is a typical Finnish zoning plan. Without all the rules, written rules, but the basic principles are shown that it's a kind of a block with 4 bigger residential volumes. Some of them need to have retail on the ground floor, and there's a big parking house in the middle serving the entire block, and then a small building in between the bigger volumes. And in total, 21,000 square meters of housing and 500 square meters of retail. And also the local detail plan, or the zoning plan, states that it has to have a metal facade, and 50% of the apartments need to be rental housing. And then the developer organized. The city actually had a rule that the developer needs to organize a invited competition, and they invited 4 teams to do it. There's, as you can see, this is the competition proposal. It looks quite a lot like the zoning plan, massing, of course, some kind of optimization of volumes and directions, but within the basic rules. So there wasn't much flexibility in that process. And we managed to win the project, and now it's being developed very hardcore on the premises of the developer and the investors, together with the city, of course. But our concept, like architecture concept, was based on this kind of idea, or like a reference to the maritime location. We call it the schooner, and the kind of architectural identity comes from that concept. But maybe this is of course something that they evaluate in the processes, but for us in the competition itself, and also now when we go forward, it's very important in this kind of location to maximize the views from all apartments. Very typical ambition, of course, because you can sell or rent apartments with higher price if you have views to the water. High floor plan efficiency to enable architectural quality. Then very much about the flexibility of the apartment layouts, how we can combine different types of apartments and measure, optimizing the spaces in the floor plan so that it can be adapted for future use. As well as the structural principles, that what kind of structure enables the highest living quality throughout time. And here's some early visualizations of the project.
And then I will take the last one really, really fast when we go down in scale to one habitat or one dwelling, actually a guest house. But here, when we started to work with the client, we were looking very much at the local conditions, of course, of the island, and then also how you could kind of make as small impact as possible, because the client, of course, also wanted to enjoy the nature in this pristine location. So we just developed two quite clear and simple kind of typologies based on the client's request. Basically a guest house on a podium, on a terrace, and then like a sauna on a jetty, because that was kind of the basic condition for that. So these two buildings consist of a bedroom and a toilet and a bathroom, I mean, and then of course a kitchen and a dining room. Then the spa is on the waterfront, and then also that is kind of merged together with the jetty for arrival by boat. So the idea here was to use locally sourced materials and then create these to build buildings with as small impact as possible on the scenic views, but also on the nature on site. So it has now grown up to basically just having those two buildings as an intervention on the island. So this is some images from the outside, from the terrace, and then from the gable, and then from the kitchen area with the guest loft. Yeah, and here we have the spa, where you have the or the sauna. Where you have the jetty as an extension of the terrace, covered terrace, and then an outdoor shower. Here are some more views from the inside of the sauna, and as well as the deck. That's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.